Welcome to Buford PUSSER, The Other Story, episode 32. In this episode, we're going to discuss the evidence involved in this case. We're going to discuss the forensic evidence, the photographic evidence, and the physical evidence that happened to be a part of this case. First, we're going to start off with the weapon that was allegedly used in the ambush, the M1 carbine or the M2 carbine. Which was it? TBI suspected it could have been either. So we're going to take a look at each, and you can determine for yourself which you think was used. The TBI was working on a theory that the weapon used in the ambush could be either an M1 or an M2 carbine. The M1 was mass-produced by several different companies during World War II to meet the needs of the military. As such, the guns manufactured by different companies operated a little bit differently, often ejecting shells differently from others. The M1 is a semi-automatic carbine, which means it requires a pull of the trigger for each round to be fired. The M1 fires a .30 caliber round, which is a glorified handgun round by many estimations, but make no mistake, that round can be very deadly. Both the M1 and M2 were manufactured by 10 different contractors for the U.S. government. The M2 looks very similar to the M1. However, it can be fired either as a semi-automatic or a fully automatic firearm. Now let's take a look at the M2 as it's being fired.
Lean into it. Well, it works with less ammo to move.
Now let's take a look at the M2 in slow motion. As I mentioned earlier, these weapons were made by different manufacturers, and therefore each fires differently. Buford did say that it sounded like they had opened up on him with machine guns. But keep in mind that the M1 and M2 can come with either a 30 round or a 15 round magazine. Now many of you may be asking, how does all this about an M1 and an M2 and how they fire play into all this? Well, it has a lot to do with the evidence, the way that shell casings were found, where they were found. And also keep in mind that Buford said that Pauline was struck in the head by one of two shots fired at the first ambush site. And Buford would tell investigators and reporters alike that the first volley of shots at the bridge only wounded Pauline. Buford would go on to say that it sounded like a bunch of machine guns opened up on him. I felt like I'd been hit by a brick, Buford said. The only shot that hit me blew all my lower teeth out and part of my tongue. You could put your fist where my jaw had been. Buford would go on to tell how that blow to his chin knocked him to the floorboard. After lying there for a while, he pulled himself up on the seat. Whoever it was stayed there with the motor running for a minute. After raising himself from the floorboard to the seat, he noticed that his assailants were still beside him. He reached over and grabbed the rifle by the barrel. Now keep in mind that Buford claimed he did all this after he was wounded in the chin. You know, a lot of people ask me why I wrote the book, Buford PUSSER, The Other Story. Well, the main reason was because on my Facebook page, where we have talked about this for years and years, after a while, it gets out of chronological order. And I had a number of people that were on my Facebook page that were new to the page itself, wanting to discuss things from the beginning, and which was kind of impossible. So it was just easier to write a book, get it in chronological order, and let people know that, hey, if you want it, it's out here. So that's the reason. It has a lot of photos, a lot of documents, a lot of things that people just don't know about the real story. Uh, People who have ordered it have told me that it is an amazing book, that they've learned a great deal that they did not know. I've done the research for you. Take advantage of it. It's available at Amazon.com. You know, we've always heard that the reason that Pauline went with him that morning was because she feared for his safety, especially when he was going alone into that part of the county. Now we know that's not true because of Jim Moffat telling us that it was always him that went with Buford, never Pauline, that she would not ride with him. Now, in this next part, Buford makes a statement that is really kind of strange because we've also heard the story that they were leaving on vacation that day. That's the reason that Pauline went with him, was to get an early start. She wanted to make sure that Buford didn't get tied up while he was investigating this disturbance. She wanted to make sure that they got an early start back to Hayside, Virginia. Now, according to Buford, they were leaving on Sunday, not Saturday, and that they already had their bags packed and they were ready to go. So I have to wonder, did anyone ever check for luggage to see if they were packed like Buford had claimed? Now, years after the ambush had taken place, a Maryland police officer, Jeffrey McLeese, wrote a letter to the TBI inquiring about the Plymouth Fury that Pusser drove. Now, he was interested in that Plymouth Fury for its historical value. After contacting the TBI, Deputy Director Steve Watson sent McLeese a letter saying that they no longer had possession of the vehicle or photographs of it that they could get to him, but they did share a certain amount of information about the gunshots that struck the car. Let's take a look at that real quick. Here is the letter that McLeese received from Deputy Director Steve Watson. The letter states that all of the bullets entered the driver's side of the car, traveling across to the passenger side. 5 bullets entered the panel back of the right rear window. 1 bullet exited the right windshield on the passenger side. 2 struck the dash. 2 entered the door post on the driver's side. The rear window on the driver's side of the vehicle was shot out, as well as both windows on the passenger side. Now we're about to take a look at the second ambush site. At this point, we know that Pauline has been shot in the head at the first ambush site. Buford said that she's only wounded. Now, he described her as reaching over, grabbing him by the arm, gasping for breath, and he drives 2.1 miles. He thinks he's lost his pursuers. He pulls over for the purpose of checking on Pauline. Now, he says he has 1 foot outside the car. He's opened the door, got his left foot out, and he says, "They're on me again." His story then says that they pulled right up beside him, about 5 feet away or less. Gun comes out the window and starts to fire. That's when he said it sounded like a bunch of machine guns. At any rate, he takes a hit in the chin. He falls through the floorboard. Then Pauline gets shot. The car is riddled with bullets. Now, we don't know exactly how many times that it may have missed between him being hit and her being hit. The story sounds suspicious when he starts to say that, he raises up, the car's still there, it's engine's still running, and he reaches out and grabs the barrel of the rifle. Now, I'm no expert on firearms, but I do know that if you fire a gun multiple times, such as was done with the M1 or M2, depending on which it was, the barrel would be hot. So for him to reach out there and grab it and not burn his hand kind of surprises me, makes me a little bit suspicious. But now let's take a look at what it would have looked like to the shooter that day. Now, granted, I didn't happen to have a Plymouth Fury in my hip pocket, so I had to make do with what I had for a vehicle. And I did use a little carbine to simulate the gun that was used. The individual that I have sitting in the car to play the part of Buford is about 6 to 8 inches shorter than Buford would have been. And he's also about 60, 70 pounds lighter than Buford would have been, not nearly as big. That's going to be important when we do this. I want you to take a look at this video. And now in this first part, you'll see some red dots that will indicate where bullets hit. Let's take a look at it. The ambush vehicle pulled alongside Buford's car, opened fire with shots striking the dash, windshield, Buford, Pauline, the door post, windows on the passenger side, and the panel behind the back seat. Now, at this point, it's really important to remember how Buford described the ambushes taking place. He stopped to check on Pauline. He opened the door, put his left foot out on the ground. His right foot was still inside the car. That's when he said, "They're on me again." The Cadillac pulled up beside him, stopped, gun came out the window, and opened fire. Now, at that point, Buford claims that he was hit in the chin, fell to the floorboard. Shots continued. Pauline was hit, and he laid there, semi-conscious or unconscious for a short time, raised himself up eventually, got back in the seat behind the steering wheel, and he saw that the ambush party was still there, the engine running. He reached out, grabbed the barrel of the rifle. But again, keep in mind that he didn't grab that barrel of the rifle until after all the shots had been fired. He claimed that whenever the car started to pull away was when he lost the grip on the rifle barrel. And keep in mind again that having been fired so many times, that gun barrel should have been very hot and difficult to hold on to. Was it possible at all that he did all this? In the reconstruction video, did you happen to notice Pauline sitting beside Buford? Now keep in mind that our stand-in for Buford was much smaller than what Buford actually was. Now, during the ambush, Buford claimed that Pauline was up against his right shoulder and that she had grasped his arm and was trying to breathe. Now, obviously, most of you didn't even see Pauline until we showed the arrow pointing toward her hands and she actually raised her hand up. She was pretty well protected by Buford's body. We don't know if Buford was telling the truth about all this, but the evidence just doesn't add up. Was Buford hit first, as he claimed, and then Pauline was hit after he fell to the floorboard? Let's see what other evidence suggests. Now, we have witness statements that a piece of Pauline's scalp with bloodied hair was located here in the ditch. But it's the location of shell casings that's such a mystery. How they could have been ejected over the car. There's a small group of shell casings on the shoulder of the road, then they string across at an angle until they reach the middle of the road. Now, if you'll recall in a previous video where we were showing shell casings being ejected from both the M1 and the M2, neither gun ejected the shells high enough and far enough to clear the Cadillac to be on the shoulder of the road, let alone stringing them along like the witness statement says. Now, this leads us to wonder, was somebody actually on foot rather than in a car while they fired into Buford's Plymouth Fury? Now let's examine how the projectile struck both the car and the victims. Now we don't know which shells impacted first, second, third, and so on. This is to simply show the location where the shells impacted. Buford is seated here, with Pauline seated next to him, holding his arm. We know that Pauline has already been shot in the head once at the first ambush site. At this point, Buford described Pauline as being only wounded, holding his arm, and gasping for breath. The McLeish letter does show that 5 rounds impacted the panel behind the passenger's rear seat window. The letter indicates that 1 round exited the windshield on the passenger's side. 1 round hit the car's dash, while a second round struck the car's factory-installed radio. Deputy Director Steve Watson would indicate that 1 shell hit the doorpost immediately behind Buford's head, followed by a second and separate round. And of course, Buford would be hit in the chin, not the jaw as the movie showed and as many people believe. And then, of course, Pauline would be hit in the head a second time. This was the shot that Buford said killed her. The TBI would estimate that 14 to 17 shots would be fired during the ambush, with the remainder of the projectiles exiting the passenger side windows. Now, I think it's important to point out that the projectiles struck the passenger's compartment of the car, spreading out over like a 30-degree area. Now, this doesn't make sense if you're sitting 5 feet from your intended target and you spread your gunfire over an area like that, only hitting him 1 time. Kind of suspicious, don't you think? Why not just aim your gun at Buford and continue to fire? There's no point in spreading the gunfire the way that it was done. Here's a video showing that the M1, even in the M2 fashion, doesn't automatically just spread like that. It hits where you aim. Now, there's a lot in the photographic evidence that a lot of people don't think about. For instance, here's a photograph of the doorpost that was right behind Buford's head that incidentally got hit by 2 different rounds. Now, was this an attempt to make it look like that somebody was trying to shoot Buford in the head? I mean, how do you miss a man the size of Buford so many times? An alleged assassin shot at Buford 14 to 17 times, most of it from approximately 5 feet away, managing only 1 shot that hit him in the chin. However, there are 2 bullet holes in the doorpost right behind Buford's head. Was this merely an attempt to make it look like that Buford was the alleged target? Buford would claim that neither he nor Pauline ever exited the vehicle. However, there's blood on the hood, on the windshield, all over the car. Obviously, someone was shot outside the vehicle. Who was it? Was it Buford? Was it Pauline? How did the blood get there if no one exited the vehicle? Now, you would think if someone was shot while sitting inside the car, you would see more blood than what we see in this photograph. Sure, there's some on the back of the seat, some on the seat itself, but not a substantial amount. Another piece of photographic evidence that leaves me wondering is the void on the door panel on the passenger side of the car. Notice in the circled area, there's almost no blood at all. It streams down, however, on both sides. If Pauline was leaning on Buford's shoulder, How did her head get all the way over to the door panel? If Pauline was still alive when they arrived at the second ambush site, as Buford claimed, when she was shot a second time, wouldn't you expect to find more blood, as her heart would have still been beating? Another troubling piece of photographic evidence is a photo of Buford's bladed fingerprints on the exterior of the car. Now, Buford claimed that neither he nor Pauline got out of the vehicle, but yet the fingerprints are found on the outside. I would suggest that Buford either shot himself or had an accomplice wound him to make the ambush look real. At that point, he reached up, touched the wound on his face with his right hand, and then, as he was getting back in the car, transferred his fingerprints to the exterior of the driver's door. Now, keep in mind that Petey Plunk would also say that they found his bladed palm prints on the trunk of the car. And that not everyone is ever going to be convinced that Buford murdered Pauline. But I think when we look at the evidence, we really have to stop and think about that as a very strong possibility. I mean, look at everything that is lined up. The argument that they had at the Old Hickory Grill, Dennis and Johnny seeing what they saw, the gun exchange there in Eastview, Levon Plunk hearing a gunshot come from the home whenever she took Pauline back to the residence. You had Diane saying that she saw Buford carry Pauline to the car and place her in the front seat. You had Ward Moore claiming that Carl had him go over to the PUSSER residence because Buford and Pauline were in a fight and they were going to kill each other. He found blood droplets on the carpet while he was there. Then you have the route that he took. Buford drove a convoluted route to get to Hollis Jordan's, where the disturbance that they were responding to was taking place. Now, why would he not go Highway 64 and then 45? True, going this convoluted route that he took is a shorter route, but it is certainly not the fastest route. Then you look at his story about the car coming out from behind the church, chasing him down, no headlights at 4:45 in the morning. That doesn't work. Then you have everything else that comes along after that. The location of the shell casings, the blood evidence. There's just so much that stacks up against Buford. And you have to wonder, did Carl help Buford set all this up after he murdered Pauline? Now, like I say, I know I'm never going to be able to convince a lot of people that this happened. There are people out there that will never see Buford as anything but a hero. Walking Tall was just a movie. Pauline's death was a crime. There is a big difference in those two scenarios. So, each one of us are going to have to make up our own minds about what happened. There's a lot that I still can't share. I don't want to get ahead of the TBI and their investigation. So I'll wait for the autopsy report to come out. I'll wait for the TBI to make a determination about their findings. But I would suggest, again, they didn't exhume Pauline on a whim. There was a reason that after 56 years, they went to the trouble and the expense of exhuming her, knowing that they were about to take down possibly Tennessee's largest law enforcement icon. So you have that as well to consider. So at any rate, we're going to leave it there for now. And we'll be having another episode this next week that's going to continue with this. We're going to take a look at the investigators that were involved in this, especially Rex Armistead. Armistead was an investigator with the Mississippi Highway Patrol, and he was one of two men, he and Charlie Goforth, that the governor of Mississippi sent to Tennessee to assist them with the investigation. So at any rate, we'll have Chuck Puckett on again. He spent a lot of time speaking with and interviewing Armistead, and we'll get his take on that. Until then, just remember, the truth has no agenda.